Hello, I'm Jenya Delima. Welcome to Writing and Editing, the author-focused podcast that takes a whole-person approach to everything related to both writing and editing. Even with our own complicated lives, many of us find fictional family conflicts and their long-held secrets to be compelling and irresistible to resist. Author Robin W. Pearson is here to share her reasons for writing about family dramas and how she keeps them intriguing and fresh from one book to the next. Well, I'm so thrilled to have you here today, Robin. Of
I am glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
course. So, did you always plan on writing about family dramas and conflicts, or was this something that just naturally happened as you began writing?
It just naturally happened, drama, not that drama follows me where I create it, but I always imagined that I'd write about family in a different context, more
Mm.
about how to solve drama because I planned to write about family and parenting. And I used to love this columnist that talked about parenting and parenting strategies and his faith and how it impacted parenting. And so I imagined that's what I would do.
Oh.
And this was after my life in editing. I started out as an editor with a children's book publisher. But then I started writing down these stories for my oldest son after I had a baby about our family and about our traditions. And so this work of fiction was birthed from that.
Mm.
Yeah, so I remember writing about pregnancy. I remember writing about getting children to sleep through the night. So
Which is a
I guess
drama
I
all
was,
on its own.
yes, a different drama, all of its own. So, but I guess looking back, I was writing about things I was experiencing. So I
Mhm.
guess now, like I'm still writing about those experiences just in a different way, just wrapping some fiction around it.
No, that all makes sense. And it's interesting too that that could have been sort of the catalyst for this too, that we start off with something that maybe is smaller in scale or is just this little snapshot of daily life. And then it turns into something bigger and grander and
Mhm.
more all-encompassing.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
as you're writing then, are you outlining or do some of these things just come to you as you're going along and drawing the story out?
I'm always jotting something down, even if it's a name. I just heard a
Mhm.
great name the other day. I was with my dad, and a nurse mentioned this name, and I thought that's a perfect name for a story, and I don't know where that character will come from, but so I'm always jotting things down and listening and getting ideas. But when it comes to particular stories, it just really depends on the story. With my very, very first book with A Long Time Coming, it just poured as I wrote, as someone filled my cup, as God filled the cup, I drank from the cup and just wrote the story. I did have a framework in terms of who the family was. I'm
Mhm.
not sure if you're familiar with Granny B's family, but I was, writing down like the different personalities and what the character looked like. But the story itself just unfolded as I wrote. And then with my second book, I tried to make sure I had certain elements because I knew it would follow certain number of months, and I knew certain
Oh,
things I
yes.
wanted to include in it. And the main character, Maxine, was writing a column, so there was some planning with that. But I usually kind of write by the seat of my pants almost, but it just really depends on the story.
Mhm.
And yeah.
Do you ever have to go back in and add hints or foreshadowing as to what that reveal will be? If, for instance, this is something where it's more of a by the seat of your pants book, and maybe you didn't know what that revelation would be when you began writing.
The way I write, I'm constantly circling
Oh, okay.
back, and so I kind of liken it to this math program that we use. We homeschool, and the way it teaches it just constantly, does this little circle of different concepts, and that's how I write as well. So as I think of something, I know some authors will just write till the end and then go back and say, "Oh, I needed to mention this here, and I need to add this to chapter three to." But because I'm constantly circling and editing as I go, and it's
Oh,
probably extra
okay,
in
yeah.
me that yes, I will have to sometimes make changes, but it's like a constant process of going in reverse and then gearing up and then moving forward. So, yeah, of course, there's some things that you can't help but you have to go back and add and make sure it connects because you really
Mhm.
do want those connections to be made. And sometimes though I'm finding out with the characters, oh, this connected to that event, and
Yeah.
we're finding out at the same time. But I do try to make sure that I'm creating this universe
Hmm.
and, with my stories so that you will see bits and pieces of different stories in each book that
Okay.
connects them. So I do try to make sure that, those are there. So,
What are
yeah.
some of the complications that come along with that versus if it was a strict standalone?
Well, you want to, with timeline, you have to make sure that, with Maxine, for instance, in this book, she has a friend, Evelyn, who's pregnant in the first book. And I mentioned her here. So I want to make sure um, that the timeline makes sense, or I want to make sure that Sassafras, which is a cafe that when I've mentioned it, it doesn't become, a hair salon. And this, like you just have to make sure there's consistency, that characters, their persnickety in this book, and I've alluded to them here. I want to make sure that their characterization is so. Yeah, see, our dogs are talking to each other, I think. Um, So we want to make sure that those things are consistent so that in that universe that it's believable.
Yes.
I think my peeps have mentioned that, okay, if you can suspend your belief, but it still has to make sense in that place.
I was thinking even about the intergenerational families because you see that a
Mhm.
lot of the time too, and having to keep that timeline straight as well.
Yeah.
So, is there anything that you used, a program or some sort of method for making sure your timeline was in order?
Yes, is this really cool innovation. It's called my Papermate pencil and in my notebook. It's hardly ever, I don't think anyone's ever heard of it. It's
High
something.
tech all the way. So we're talking James Bond level now.
Yes. I just love to write things down. And so I really just am writing things down on, paper. And then when I'm going through, I love to read it through and then use post-it notes and note things, as I go through the manuscript that I've printed out and see, okay, this makes sense here. Oh, I didn't mention this in chapter 2, or the name was different. Those are also, things to look out for because I usually talk about large families or groups of different friends. And so I've got to make sure the names or the nicknames even are
Oh,
the
yeah.
same. In Walking in Tall Weeds, Frederick called his wife Etta, and I need to make sure that he calls her Etta in these certain situations, or that when in this book and the stories we carry, um, the way Ophelia said dear, or way that, sorry, Glory said dear, that it was dia, like, and it was used at the right moment at the right time, so those little details, because I want to make sure it's real. So
Yes.
yeah. Yeah.
Especially since you have so many characters and since people might see a character pop up later on.
Yes.
How much backstory do you give each of your characters? And then also, when do you know when you've included enough?
Wow, those are great, great questions. Is there enough? I mean, because I can read a book that's
Yeah.
been, out there for years, and I'm like, I should have said this, or I could have said that. That's the perfectionist in me that, that it's never completely perfect. But um, because I do want the reader, though, to be able to read each book as if it's a standalone.
Right.
Um, but for the faithful reader who's been reading each of my books, I want them to feel that connection. So either feel connected to the book or be inspired to go back and read the book. So there's just a balance in trying to do that. There's a character from Walking in Tall Weeds that's in the stories we carry, and I wanted to make sure that he had the same personality and that he talked about something that happened in his past, but that wouldn't confuse the readers who maybe, haven't read Walking Tall
Right.
Weeds, but that would make readers nod along
Oh,
who
yeah.
have read. So you want it to be a reward and also, inspiration at the same time. So
Do you think having that fuller character backstory or character profile makes it easier to include them later on and know just how to insert them or even how they'd react in a given situation?
for me as the writer or for the reader?
For you as the writer, yes.
Yes, definitely. I mean, because you come to love them, and hate them too because then they haunt you all the time.
Yes.
But and so you know them. I mean, when you've spent so much time with your characters, and so you get into their heads, and so it is good to have that background and know, okay, he would say this here, or does this character even make sense popping up in this
Oh,
story?
yes, that's a good one too.
Like
Yeah.
because with the stories we carry, it's set in a pretty close um, geographically to Walking in Tall Weeds. So it makes sense that, Frederick would pop up. So you just want to make sure that it's logical and that not you're just not inserting this character out of the blue like it's a soap opera, like, oh, they've been,
Oh, right. I just happened to drop by this grocery store
Yes.
at this exact moment, even though I live 30
Yes.
miles away, right?
Yes.
And I don't actually go grocery shopping myself.
Right. Right. You want your readers to feel at home.
Have you ever had the opposite though, where you've had to introduce a new character where maybe you didn't do all that background information? Was it harder in that case to figure out where to place them and how to have them react or speak?
Yeah, well, each book is so new, and I just think you're learning your characters as you go. And sometimes you don't know exactly what they're going to say until you're deep, into the story, and
Yeah.
until you really get to know them. I do try to um, for me, like with my writing, I think some people do lots of and lots and lots of research before, they get started. So there are no surprises almost. They can write a book and, a short period of time. But for me, it takes a long time for me to write a story. And so I really, during that time, I get the time to get to know that character. And we develop a relationship. By the end
Oh,
of it,
yes.
over that time, we know each other. And so, yeah, we could sit down and have tea, or maybe I wouldn't have them over. It just depends on who it is, But I'm inspired a lot by people that I've met or family members. Not that I'm writing a life story, but just different characteristics or um,
Mhm.
I like to be inspired by what I write. I don't want to be, dictated to or write what's in, what's current or what's appealing to most people. Um, I've always said like a leaf falling could inspire me,
Oh,
but
yes. Beautiful.
it's hard for me to plan out blog posts and things like that because I'm usually just inspired by the moment. So, yeah.
How does that work then with coming up with this family drama? So where do you find inspiration for that or even the bigger story?
Well, I love to write about God's love for us, his pursuit of us, and how that affects us in our day-to-day relationships. That's what I love to write about. So I have lots of inspiration with that and just, with intergenerational relationships,
Mhm.
multi-generational relationships. With my children. We have, 7 children. We homeschool. So inspiration is daily and it's
Yeah.
minute by minute. Distractions are daily, minute by minute. So that's where a lot of my inspiration comes from, just from the dynamics. I mean, I feel
Mhm.
like I could probably write a million stories about just the different dynamics of working, living, loving people, and meeting them where they are, those types of things. So that's where my inspiration comes from.
When you're looking at your characters, how do you bring their inner lives onto the page? And then how do you also do it in a way that doesn't feel like it's slowing the pacing unnecessarily?
hmm I guess a slow pace is so subjective. My children, we debate that, like, because I feel like stories now sometimes they just want like he he was dead. Like as soon as you open the book, there's a dead body like on the first page, Whereas I feel like as a Southern fiction writer, we do things at a different pace here in North Carolina, and so I write at a different pace, and so the story comes out unfolds at a different pace. So. I hope it's not too slow, but I think it takes time like I make this soup and it's called stack soup and it's layered, like the ingredients are
Oh,
stacked
okay.
and it takes a long time. Like you have to chop out everything and and put them in at a certain time and then let the flavors simmer. So some people would think, oh, that's a slow, it takes a long time to make that soup. Whereas someone else would say that soup has built a lot of flavor and it's really good and it's worth the time. And you can tell that there's been an investment with it. And I think and I pray that with my work that there's an investment. It's more like that stacked soup that it's layered and it builds on each other, the story, the
Yeah.
characters that it's unfolding.
And then how do you think this stacking or layering contributes to fully exploring each character's emotions and emotional responses?
Hmm. Now you are a great interviewer. Like I love that.
Thank
You're great.
you.
I love it. Um, wow. Like it allows the characters to develop as well, I think. Because you think about we don't just react the same way every time to even the
Right.
same stimulus or action or how I respond to something today is going to be different from how I respond tomorrow, maybe to the very same thing, the very same question. So for my characters, they're slowly growing to, or just they're developing. I don't want to use the word slowly, but they're developing and they're getting richer. That their knowledge, their awareness of what they're going through, of themselves, of their relationship with God, of their relationship with family. Like it just, if you think about over time, our relationships change.
Yes.
And so for my characters, it's the same. And sometimes with a story, right, the time is compacted. It seems like
Mhm.
it is at least.
Right.
And you have to show this development, over a few seasons or over one season or a few months or with some books maybe, years. But um it's important to show that growth and that change and that layering because different things happen, right? So you add that and then something else might happen and you add that or you might take away this seasoning or whatever, something that happens, um but it makes the books richer, makes the character richer, I think. uh,
No,
yeah,
I definitely agree.
yeah.
Yes, and then like you were saying too, with their development or their growth, and you named the three different ways that they might grow. So growing spiritually or growing even that sense of self, growing in your relationships. Why do you think it's important to show all three and not just pick one and let that be their primary or only trajectory?
Well, because our relationship with God, for me, our relationship with God impacts everything. And when he comes into your life, he changes things. And so when I find, peace with him, that's going to affect how I relate to my parents, my
Mm,
past, how I view it, my perspective, how I relate to my children or just friends, how I, react to my community. Um, so you can't, we're not isolated. We don't live, in isolation. Even a homebody, you know, I'm a homebody, but I still don't live. We can talk at any time. We don't live in isolation. So let's even knowing more about yourself is going to change how you interact with God. Like it's just this dynamic
mhm,
interaction that just keeps affecting each other. So um, there's a friend, we talked about cooking, but there's a friend who prays over, like when she's making something for someone, taking a meal somewhere, she prays for that, food and how she's making it. And it affects how she's making what she's preparing. It changes her mindset. So
oh
everything
yeah.
that we do, it impacts, how we do it. The why we're doing something impacts
Mhm.
it. So your how, your who, so it's all, we're just not this like static,
Right.
person. So yeah.
Yeah, as you were answering, I tried to think of an example that wouldn't be spoilery, and the first character that came to mind was Scrooge from A Christmas Carol in the very end. And I mean, even if you've only seen one of the movies, but yeah, he's interacting differently with his neighbors and people on
Yeah,
the street and just someone that he calls down to and himself. So
right,
yeah, you
right,
know that it's all encompassing with every single person or
right.
even place that you go to.
Right, right. And it changes how you look back,
Mhm.
at, 'cause the same event that was, a story they wrote with Dysfunction Junction, and how how you see yourself can impact like how you hear information.
Yeah, yes.
Oh, you can be in the same room and you can hear and someone could say the same words and different people will hear the words differently,
Right. Yes.
or and put a different meaning on those words. So, yeah, perspective, yeah, it changes everything. Relationships change
Mhm.
everything. So,
And I'm
yeah.
sure we've all seen that even at any family holiday gathering where
Yes.
one person, yes, oh, did you see the way they looked at me? And then the other person says, I have no idea what you're talking about. That seemed like just a normal way to look at you. Or,
Yes.
as a mom, you got the two kids in the back seat.
Yes. Yes. It's funny, like with our dog, like, Oscar, it's my daughter and I will he'll look a certain way. And we will say that, Oscar's thinking this. No, he's just thinking this. Like we'll have a different way, of saying this is what he's thinking. It's funny. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, and I love that we made a dog the example for Alex.
Yes.
I also want to talk about setting and how you
Yes.
use setting both to shape the story and
Hmm.
for also how you allow the characters to grow because this is their setting versus if you'd picked someplace else.
Mm. Yeah, with this story, it's set in small town, I think it'd be small town anywhere, but small town North Carolina. And how the people, know each other. They work together. Their homes are relatively close together. They see people coming and going, and they see each other all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that's important to this story because for Glory, who has made this bookstore kind of her home, it's where she lives and she works, but then she looks out this window at life. She can still see the comings and goings of people who, work at stores downtown, or her best friend has become, the woman who's worked at a jewelry store, next door for the last, couple of decades. And but that's important. That small town life, that feel is important for this story. It just captures, the feel of that there are big elements that happen, like big themes of forgiveness, but you can find them all in this small, area. And I want people to feel like, okay, and connect to that because you could connect to that in any town,
Yeah, that's
USA. I
true.
think that your people are still dealing with these huge, problems that take place kind of inside. That's another
Mm-hmm.
small, area, but they can have great impact. So I haven't written a story at the beach yet, but I'm considering
Oh,
that. Yeah. But I tend to focus on the South. I just the pace of it, I think, affects, my stories, and the
oh, for
food
sure.
and all of that. Like it's just where I live. It's what I know. And even though we've lived, all over on the East Coast, but there's so many different things about the South that just come to life in my stories that I like to write about.
No, you bring up a great point with how setting influences pacing. And so you had said before that you're more slower paced anyway.
Mhm.
And I think this is just a really great example of that. And so if you'd had something set on, oh, I don't know, a colony on Mars or something, it probably would have to almost be faster paced just to mimic that lifestyle
Right,
and what it would
right.
be like in that environment, whether you wanted it to be or not versus a small town where people are just sort of ambling along from one place to the next and no one's in some
Hmm.
great hurry. Yeah. Or even
Hmm.
just how the culture of living in some place influences your pace of life.
Yes, yes. One thing that I feel like I've had to counteract maybe is this, like with my first book with Granny B, like she had this
Hmm.
this Southern accent, and I always want people, I don't want them to confuse this accent with the
Wow.
fact that we drop a G to impact your view of like our intelligence
Right.
or our wit or any of that. And so I love, I don't know, just hopefully educating some people about the South than that. Just because we may have a drawl, it doesn't mean that we don't know what we're talking about or we're dim-witted or slow-witted. We can have a quick wit, but deliver it in a different pace, maybe.
Well, before we end, what do you most hope readers learn about their own families or even
Mm.
about themselves after reading the stories we carry?
The story talks a lot about found family
Mhm.
as well as like your, I guess, blood relations. We've lived in a lot of different places, and so we had to create family, where we were. My children had, grandmother figures and aunts and uncles who weren't related to them, out of the friends that we made. And that for Glory, she has created this, this idea of found family, my character in the stories we carry. So the importance of that, the importance of forgiving yourself, the importance of, some of the stories that she's carried have been stories that she's told herself that are not true.
Ah, yes.
And so to be careful to the voices that you listen to, whether they're based in truth or based in hurt and pain, and sometimes when we're also carrying the stories of other people, with us
Yeah.
and the importance of being true to those stories and telling them, like, of course, this bookstore, like, it's like a metaphor for all of that, but carrying all those stories and the responsibility that Glory feels for managing the store and almost not leaving it. But we don't want to be bound, just like she's bound to this store. We don't want to be bound to those, voices from the past and bound to those things that we're carrying, those weights.
Mhm.
Um, because truth should liberate you,
Yes,
and love should
100%.
liberate you, and
Yes.
be something that you do take with you and not something that that holds you back. So those are things that I write about with this story. Also, it was inspired so much by The Count of Monte Cristo, which is one of
Ah,
my favorite stories of all time. And just that idea of that righteous vengeance. And it may surprise you, I think, with this story of the person who believes, in God, but is using her faith as a weapon, or it's
oh,
a
right,
person
right.
who's struggling with her faith, but maybe is living out that love for others in a way that,
Mhm.
is more biblical. So anyway, it's just that, yeah, lots of things going on in this small town.
All right. Well, I hope that people are interested after hearing that because that
Hope
was
so.
so beautifully said and an
Oh,
excellent
thank
reminder.
you. Thank you.
And then
This was
thank
lots of
you again.
fun.
Yes, it was. And thank you for listening. And be sure to check out the show notes for additional information, including links for Robin and her latest book. And if you enjoyed today's episode, I'd appreciate it if you could please rate or review this podcast on your favorite listening platform. Thanks again.